All right, I am here with Peter Lavelle, host of RT's CrossTalk. Peter, let's tackle Venezuela. What's going on here?
Well, there's a lot of things going on here, but what isn't happening is trying to save or protect or give life to democracy in Venezuela. It's not that. I can tell you. I can assure you of that. All right. What it is a geopolitical gambit here, and Venezuela is in the center of it. This is a way for, I'm sure, the Boltons and the Pompeos, and what role Trump has in this, we don't know. It's sticking fingers into the eyes of the Russians and the Chinese. The Chinese have loaned over $39 billion to the Venezuelan government. Last year alone, it was they got a loan and signed 20 contracts of various kinds of trade agreements for $3.8 billion. So this is not pocket change here. And what happens is that Venezuela, in its critical economic situation, which is a self-inflicted wound. I am not going to give any three cheers to Venezuelan socialism, not at all. It's very bad governance. Corruption is endemic. So if Venezuela goes into default, the Chinese pick up quite a few nice prize assets. Washington does not want this to happen. And there is a precedent. There was a very important port in Sri Lanka, I think it was last year, that fell into Chinese hands because the country couldn't pay its debts. And so it's a strategy the Chinese have. Okay. Also, Russia, that has loaned billions also to the Venezuelan government, also mines the gold in Venezuela, and Turkey refines it and certifies it. No wonder Erdogan came out and supports the legitimate government. Interestingly enough, as a side, of course, Poroshenko agrees in recognizing the illegal government, just like he illegally came to power. So at least Poroshenko is the only one that's being true to his colors.
And on a side note, what you said, Peter, rings true. On very quick side notes, because the Chinese did the same thing to Greece. When Greece was having issues, now China runs the largest port in Athens because of the financial issues and the loans that the Chinese gave.
Okay, it's a strategy. Yeah. It's a strategy, all right? And what Washington wants to do is to make sure that doesn't happen. Also, what they want to do is, remarkably, Bolton says that they're going to find a way to make sure the illegal interim president gets the oil revenues from the export of petroleum, which he even said he didn't know how it would be done. So what they want to do is they want to starve the government of its exports revenues and make the situation even worse. See, that's the whole thing. They just want to make it worse, all right? And it will worsen, and there is a very real possibility of a civil war type event occurring in Venezuela. Again, I want to stress, the economy is run terribly. This is why we have this here. Out of control inflation. People are very frustrated. However, let's look at the facts here. The military at this point is not going to switch sides, though. We have to be honest, just saying. The military has intervened in Venezuelan politics in the past. How do you think Chavez got to the top? Okay, but at this point, it doesn't look like to be the case. The government is unpopular, but no single grouping is more popular than the government. The opposition itself is very, very much divided. You have a lot of egos that want to run it. They have ties to the West, to NGOs, clandestine operations by the United States. So, they're politicking to the West to get, again, kind of very much like a Poroshenko scenario or a Saakashvili scenario. So the government itself is in the high in the polls in the high 30s, but they have more popularity than any other single group, okay, or entity. So this is looking very, very bad. Trying to blockade or discourage people from buying their oil. 6% of American oil comes from Venezuela. A lot of people don't know this, but Venezuelan oil is very heavy, it's very thick, and it has to be refined in certain types of refineries. those are in the United States. Okay, that oil is refined there. I don't think there'll be any impact on gasoline prices or the price of oil, at least in this early stage of this invented, man-made, intentional crisis. So that's where we stand right now. I think that Trump's official decision to recognize this interim president was a really grave mistake. How do you walk that back? See, this always happens. So you make a decision on off the cuff, and then it's very difficult to walk back. So has Venezuela entered into a deep, permanent crisis because you won't be able to talk back something? The United States has shown that it is obviously not a fair broker. The European Union is waffling. Both individual countries within the EU have recognized this illegal move in Venezuela. It isn't worldwide. It's. I think a lot of people are trying to figure out what's going on. But really what I worry about is the continued collapse of the Venezuelan economy, and that's going to create a massive refugee problem that's going to affect the entire region, all the way up to the American border, all right? And so the wall, okay, if there wasn't a reason, this is it, okay? Because Venezuela is a very important country in South America. If it goes south, no pun intended, it's going to affect everybody in the region. So the law of unintended consequences are in play here. And there's no good answer to what's going on right now. I mean, my suggestion is to leave them alone. But the United States and its allies in the region actively are trying to undermine everything the Venezuelan government is doing. And they're only making matters worse. So that's where we stand right now. It was a poorly thought out decision, and I don't see how it can be walked back. And nothing good is facing Venezuela's immediate future at all.
What do you make of the media that you said that it's branded as worldwide support for this, is worldwide for this change in government, but it's really not. I mean, the media is pushing that narrative very hard.
Yeah, I mean, the thing, okay, it's a socialist country. It's neither here nor there, in my opinion. I really don't care, all right? There is genuine support for the government in Venezuela. There's no denying that, okay? Worldwide, that's always like international community. No, that means America and its friends. That's what international community means. The countries that count, I mean, Mexico is on the fence because they know that if it goes, things go very bad in Venezuela, Mexico's going to get hit, okay, hard, and it's in dire straits right now as well. So China counts, Russia counts, a NATO ally, Turkey counts in this case. So I think that nothing's going to go through the UN. I mean, the United Nations Security Council meeting can be called for a talk, but not for if one country says we'll come together, but we won't vote on anything. Because if you're pressing for a vote on something, you say, well, I don't even want to sit down and talk. That's the United Nations Security Council rules. So we'll see where that goes. Pompeo apparently is going to represent the United States. I mean, this is one of his projects here. I think, we could go down, this is a kind of a typical American intervention in Latin America. There's a very long history of that. But as I started out, I think it has more to give a black eye to the Chinese and to the Russians, because the United States realizes that the Chinese have a strategy, and you can think whatever you want of it, but it's a very effective strategy, okay? If you need money, we'll loan it to you, and you have to leverage it against your assets. And there's no way in the world Washington is going to allow Venezuelan assets to fall into the hands of the Chinese. No way. It's not about democracy. It's not about democracy, please. And media coverage of it is so simplistic. You bring out these people that, hardly know anything what they're talking about. The same people that talked about Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, Syria, they don't know what they're talking about. Marco Rubio, he's put himself into the mix because it's a Hispanic Latino issue, and he's some kind of authority on it, which he's not an authority in anything as far as I can tell. He's basically a menace and a pest. And that's unfortunate because Donald Trump needs allies in the Republican Party. And if he thinks this is a good move, it's a bad move, Mr. President, because your base doesn't like this, or at least a part of your base doesn't like this. It's a sense of betrayal against, we're in or out of Syria, okay? Military intervention, apparently Trump has talked about this. What a stupid idea. It's completely unnecessary. It will only make things worse. And he promised no more foreign adventures. Okay, so I think it's a bad move for. Of course, the foreign policy blob agreed it. Okay, because that's their policy. But a part of his base, a slice of his base, is going to say, "But you promised differently."
Yeah, the argument is that, and you're hearing this from a lot of alternative media and a lot of right conservative channels and news outlets, is that, well, it's a socialist country. And we're with Trump because, he's going to bring these libertarian values or these democratic values or these capitalist values into Venezuela. And we have to stamp out socialism, Maduro's socialism, which has brought the country to its knees. So this is a good move. Well, but listening to you, it sounds like this is unintended consequences. This thing could be an utter disaster.
Okay, well then what is democracy supposed to mean? Democracy is only good when you get the outcome you like? I'm sorry, it doesn't work that way. All right? Essentially, this is what people voted for. Are there voting irregularities in Venezuela? Probably. I'm not an expert on the electoral process in Venezuela. Is there a lot of corruption? Yeah, a whole lot of corruption. But no one in the opposition has ever gotten a plurality of votes, okay? It reminds me of Russian liberals. They can never win elections, so they look to the outside to get moral and financial support, okay? The opposition in Venezuela, though it may be, depending on how you divide them up, they are an electoral bloc, but not enough to go over the top. So what do? You like Democrats, if you don't like the system or the system doesn't work for you, you overturn the system, like get rid of the electoral college. Okay, no, this is what we've got. This is what we've got to work with here. The fact that it's socialist is really immaterial, and that's a dishonest excuse for participating in an illegal regime change against international law. All right. It's up to the people of Venezuela what their fate and future is going to be. It should not be in the hands of John Bolton and Mike Pompeo. Absolutely not.
Yeah, and they haven't weathered the sanctions that the U.S. government has been placing on them for a lot of years. They just haven't been able to deal with them as well as, say, Russia or even in Iran.
Yeah, well, and it's because it is so dependent on export of petroleum. But they've done a number of things, getting involved in and buying goods for. It's almost like barter, where they can get pharmaceuticals and food and things like that. Getting involved in gold swaps. Okay, that deals with Deutsche Bank. The Bank of England is really hesitant to allow Venezuela have control over its own gold reserves, okay, because that's where they are. So again, some countries have more sovereignty than others, okay? So the Venezuelan government has been finding ways to get around it. But, again, I'll say it for the third time. They have these problems are self-inflicted. When this is what happens to petro countries like this, where a lot of cash comes in. It's called Dutch disease, and it creates complacency and greed. Okay, and that's what we have here. But again, I will stress that is not a reason to illegally overturn a sovereign country's current political system. All right. I mean, then if it's all about socialism, why don't you overturn the tyranny in Saudi Arabia? Okay. I mean, why not that? Okay. If you're talking about democracy all of the time, I mean, ask Bernie Sanders what democracy is like in America. Why in the world? It's just outrageous and hypocritical that the United States is talking about democracy in Venezuela when democracy is challenged in the United States itself. Okay, all the media coverage of Venezuela. How much Western media coverage was there of the yellow vest in France? Very little. Very little. And when they did, and they came from the right, they criticized global warming. It had nothing to do with the living standards of a middle class being crushed by neoliberalism. Okay. Again, everything is skewed. It's skewed.
meddling in elections. We've been hearing that for 2 years.
Yeah, right. I mean, why don't we just, why don't we find a yellow vest in Paris and say, you're the interim president of the French Republic, okay? You take it. The same thing, okay?
Right. So in the last couple of minutes we have here, Peter, where do we go from here? What do you think is going to be happening now?
It's going to be, well, first of all, Venezuela's cut diplomatic relations with the United States. The United States is going to keep members of the embassy staff there. I think that's a very bad move. If a country doesn't want you there, then you should leave. But the United States is saying it's going to stay. What is that, a human shield? That is a frightening thought here. Like I said, making such a quick decision like this is, how do you walk it back? How do you work out of it? How do you find a resolution? Because the current government has, even though it's a country in economic crisis, it still has a lot of assets. The police, the intelligence services, and the military. Now, as long as they stay on the side of the government, we have deadlock here. Now, how much the United States and its allies are going to invest in the opposition, and to what degree? To the point of violence? We don't know yet. But it could go down that path. And I'm very, very worried about it. When you have a dire economic situation like this, there are people that can be easily bought off. And so it's the immediate midterm future is very, very dim for Venezuela. And it didn't have to be this way. I think that if you leave the Venezuelans alone, they can figure out their own problems. They don't need outsiders, and certainly not the United States, considering its record in the hemisphere for the last 150 years.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And I haven't heard anyone in the media talk about what happens. Say Maduro does step down. Say he does leave. No one has talked about what happens next. What's the next steps? I mean, you have this vacuum. I mean, well, what's going to take place then?
Well,
what's the next plan?
That's not going to happen. That's certainly not going to happen. The thing is if you're going to try to force the current government out, that's probably going to entail some kind of violence, and then violence begets violence. Right. A lot of people, in South American countries, the state is a pretty big employer, and a lot of people saying, what's going to happen to me? Okay, I'm on their side. And what will there be some kind of lustration? People being thrown out of their jobs and whatnot? No, I mean too much uncertainty would be at stake, and again, that kind of uncertainty would beget violence. This is not the right way to do it. All right, this is definitely the worst possible way of doing it. It's made a bad situation far, far worse. And the Chinese are going to say, I mean, if there is a regime change in one form or another. Will the new government honor its loan commitments to the Chinese? Will they honor their commitments to Russia and Turkey and other countries? That's not a healthy situation to have. So there's a lot. The major stakeholders in this gambit are actually outside of Venezuela. Yeah. Why did they pick this guy? This guy's like a Saakashvili Poroshenko. Just a cutout, a stand-in for Washington.
And before we started this show, you even said, this never, ever works. We've tried it over and over and over again. Same result.
Same result. And the biggest victims of all of this will be Venezuela. And the worse it gets for Venezuela, the worse it will become for the entire region. They will certainly regret the day they started down this path.
Oh boy. All right. Peter Lavelle, host of RT's CrossTalk. Thank you very much. Guys, if you like this video, click on the subscribe button down below and click on that notifications bell to get notifications every time we push out a new video. Visit the Duran shop, pick up a t-shirt, help support the Duran, and in the description box down below, you'll find links to our PayPal and Patreon page. Please donate to the Duran. It really, really helps us out a lot. Peter Lavelle, host of RT's CrossTalk. Thank you very much. Until next time, guys, take care.